Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my pretty belated Maybe Midrash wrap up for 2022. The Maybe Midrash Readathon is a readathon that takes place in May, and it was started by Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse. This is, I think, the third year of the readathon. And he added a couple of special new components this year onto the pre-existing ones, which were to read a work of serious fiction and serious nonfiction regarding a world religion. And this year he also added on watching a film about world religion and also to basically interact with other people during the month of May in a spiritual manner who are taking part in the Readathon, which I didn't do that last part. I can only maybe retroactively say that I'd love to talk to people about the Readathon experiences, and I should go looking for more maybe Midrash wrap-up videos. Personally, at the moment, right now, I'm obsessed with all the midyear freakout tags, but anyway. Moving into the meat of this video, I'm going to, in fact, wrap up my reading and watching, starting with the movie that I watched, an Israeli movie called The Women's Balcony, which I watched very late, like just very recently rather than in May. So The Women's Balcony is a comedic but serious film about religious issues. It takes place in Jerusalem in relatively contemporary times. I think the movie's only a handful of years old. It centers around a Mizrahi modern Orthodox community, I think is the easiest way to describe them. So it means that the men, do wear kippot every day, and they, pray every day, and keep a lot of halacha, the law, and so do the women. The women are what most people would call relatively modest, in that they attend the synagogue regularly, at least weekly as well, and the big thing, of course, is that they sit in what is called the women's balcony, so that this congregation, because that's what we're following a small congregation of people who belong to a neighborhood synagogue, and the women sit in the balcony and observe the stricture that, the sexes should be separated. So yeah, there's our sort of backdrop here. The movie opens during a bar mitzvah celebration that everyone is happily taking part in, and things are getting very eager and exciting, worked up as the young man about to become bar mitzvah is called up to read from the Torah. But then a tragedy strikes where we'd already kind of been told in the very beginning. The rabbi was talking with some of the members of the congregation about, the building being in a little bit of disrepair, and it was worse than anyone thought, because the balcony, part of the balcony, collapses, and so they lose, they lose their Torah scroll, which is sad, and also the Rebetzin, the rabbi's wife, who was in that section of the women's balcony, ended up in the hospital unconscious, and her husband, the rabbi, was more psychologically affected, I think, and he mostly lived in denial for the movie about what was going on, and he was calling his live-in helper by his wife's name and that sort of thing, and didn't want to see her and didn't want to go into the synagogue. So this was a big tragedy in the normal everyday lives of these people, where the synagogue was very central to their everyday existence. And the men, one of the first things they needed was, I guess, a way to develop a minyan, which is a quorum of 10 needed to pray publicly with other people. Otherwise, you have to pray privately, religiously speaking. And they no longer had their space. And so they were outside in the neighborhood, asking strangers, will you join our minyan so we can pray publicly together? And they weren't having any luck. Other people had already prayed, or, that sort of thing. And they weren't having much luck, joining other congregations, because of all the various gossip and, foibles of human interaction. So finally, they come across this rabbi who is ultra-Orthodox, or certainly more Orthodox than they are. I guess we really would call him ultra-Orthodox or Haredi. And he immediately, jumps upon this as, a mitzvah, a good deed that he wants to take part in. So he brings a bunch of his followers. He is a local teacher. So he brings them to pray with basically our main male cast. And then he ingratiates himself in wanting to fix the synagogue, which, does come from, I would say, arguably a good place. He wants to help these people, and he wants to do it because he is a God-fearing man who truly believes that, it was a huge tragedy to lose a place of worship and, a scroll, and to have, people traumatized. So he helps them out, like, he gets, a bunch of permits and stuff through the big Israeli bureaucracy process so that they can start renovating and fixing the synagogue much sooner than expected. And in the moment, everyone's, and the main female characters especially, are very excited about that. But then they discover that with the limited funds, the rabbi, who I guess we kind of come to understand this through some of his sermons about how women aren't really needed in the synagogue. They're too, sacred on their own, blah blah, and so you don't, and also they should be more modest and basically, home is their refuge and realm. So maybe not as important in the synagogue. So surprise, surprise, the women's balcony is like closed off and not fixed, so they don't have their space back in the synagogue. And meanwhile, this rabbi is ingratiating himself, and a bunch of people actually are sort of falling under his sway. He's a impassioned speaker, and he, I guess, speaks in a lot of ways to, I guess, a sense of guilt about what happened, like that they were having this wonderful celebration, and that then this tragedy befell them, and how is this their fault? And so they turn to sort of a religious, oh, we should be more modest. And I mean, that's something that the ultra-Orthodox sometimes card out as, when tragedy befalls you, God is punishing you, and you need to, adhere more strictly to stricture. But it's causing schisms in the community, especially with the women, especially with the main character who's like the matriarch of the community, Etty, who really never has any compunction to become more, ultra-Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox at all. And she's never guilted or shamed into it. She's perfectly happy and fine with who she is, and she just wants her community back. And this rabbi is really ingratiating himself in the community, and he feels like this is his calling, basically, to make sure that the synagogue comes back in like the most halakhically pure way possible. And that he's going to do things his way, even though it's technically not his community, and it's their community. But he's the one, of course, following the rule of God most, strictly according to halacha and the sages and the blah, and we have a lot of texts, and a lot of pontifications. So anyway, that's the gist of the novel, and so it's drawing this schism, especially between some of the female friends, and some of them I feel like fell under the rabbi's sway a little quickly, but maybe I'm being too critical there, and especially a schism between the husbands and the wives, of course. And it becomes a question in the serious context, I guess, about who is right, religiously speaking. Like, what would you adhere to? Would you adhere to the most strict traditional strictures, or is community the most important thing when it comes to, rebuilding the synagogue? Of course, it's not, because the plot goes on, and the women raise money on their own to rebuild the women's balcony. But then the rabbi turns around, the Haredi rabbi turns around and says, no, well, halakhically speaking, we need to privilege getting a new Sefer Torah, holy scroll, into the synagogue before we, deal with the women's section. And so that's their newest thing that they are fighting over. So yeah, that's the gist of what this movie is about. So yeah, it actually is very much about religious practice and what's the most important thing within practice and community building or tradition building. And it's especially, I think, interesting to get it from this perspective because it's about nobody in this isn't Orthodox, and I don't think, in terms of progressive Judaism, nobody in this is egalitarian the way that most of us would be egalitarian. Like, I belong to what's called a conservative synagogue, but actually that's more of a reactionary term. In Israel, it's called the Masorti movement. And I mean, I have predominantly female clergy. So, you know, if we had a women's balcony, we'd all be like crammed into it. We should send the men to the women's balcony. So, of course, we don't have a women's balcony. We are egalitarian. But in this movie, you know, we're talking more about Orthodox communities. And it was nice, too, that some of the women definitely, you know, had a strong sense of self, despite, you know, any stereotypes about even the modern Orthodox. So yeah, I very much enjoyed it. I'm glad I got to it, and I believe in the US this movie is available for anybody with, I guess, a streaming service through Tubi, through that app. So yeah. Okay, moving on to the books where I actually have a script. Maybe the first thing I should do is move this Hogwarts Haggadah, unofficial Hogwarts Haggadah, so that I have room here to prop the books up as I speak about them. So anyway, both my books this year, I think, have challenged nostalgia as a veritable way of keeping Judaism alive. Coming back to the movie, should we always keep to rigid tradition or follow the status quo, or should we consider other aspects like community building and otherwise step out of line? So I'll start by going into my fiction pick, which is The Slaughterman's Daughter by Yaniv Itzkovitz. This is a historical fiction novel that takes place in the late 19th century in the Pale of Settlement and follows various members of a Jewish community around that area. They actually do a fair bit of traveling, surprisingly. And so since this is the Maybe Midrash Readathon, and Midrash comes from a Jewish context, of course I have to mention any quotes that use the word in them, and one comes at the very beginning of, or relatively speaking, of The Slaughterman's Daughter to sort of set things up. So yeah, this is taking place when the main character Fanny is trying to decide what to do about her family. It's in tatters because her brother-in-law has abandoned her sister Mendy and his children. And so Mendy, first of all, is suffering from depression, and then also, secondly, due to some restrictions of tradition, she is an agunah, or a chained woman, meaning she can't get on with her life until he either comes back or offers her a divorce. And then otherwise, she's kind of stuck and she doesn't have another caretaker she can turn to because she can't get married again, so she and her children would be stuck in abject poverty and isolation if her husband Zvi Meir isn't found. So the village rabbi carts out the story of Cain and Abel for a very specific purpose. And much more can be added, said the rabbi. Reams of words can be said. The conclusion will remain the same. When it comes to the things that really matter, one should follow the community and its customs. Fanny said nothing and waited patiently for him to finish his midrash and add congratulations and adulations to her and her household, to her sister and her household, and to all their relatives and their households. And when she left, she felt the knife and knew it would not symbolize anything that called for a long and winding explanation. She missed her father, Meir Anshel Schechter, righteous man of blessed memory, but the knife represented nothing more than the knife itself. More is known than unknown. It was an object that her father had given her as a child because he recognized that she had what it took to use it. And even though she had sworn an oath never to slaughter again, she could not let go of the confidence the knife exuded. Few people were as adept with the knife as she. Okay, so even though the rabbi used the word community, I technically used it differently in the movie section when I was talking about moving away from stricture, where he meant to stay with customs and traditions, which included things like, first of all, that a woman can't be a shochet, a kosher slaughterer with a knife, which she alludes to in here, that even though it breaks from tradition, she's actually good at it, and it doesn't have to mean anything. The knife doesn't have to have any other special meaning. And this is what is part of what ultimately leads her to decide to do something very brash, which is to abandon her own family and community in order to track her brother-in-law down and bring him back or force a writ of divorce. So she ends up traveling through the Russian Empire with a couple of other Jewish or formerly Jewish outcasts. And there is a lot to be said about the position of Jews in the dying Russian Empire. For generations, they'd been demonized as a foreign element and a dangerous anti-Christian element in their own homes. Their movements were restricted by the state. Most Jews were not allowed to live outside of the area called the Pale of Settlement, which encompassed various countries in the empire, or various parts of countries. And then their own customs arguably grew narrow and backwards. Here's a quote to that effect at the end of the book, when a Jewish character who'd previously abandoned his faith for socialism looks back at Fanny's village. I mean, these people have no idea. They live like their ancestors did a century ago. Why don't you give them one of your pamphlets, Novak suggests, but he knows that there is something to his interpreter's observation. This obsolete way of life here in Motal is doomed to disappear. He will gain nothing by questioning these crackpots. When all of this is over, I will leave for New York, Chaim Laser says unexpectedly. New York, Novak says. How does that fit in with your socialist ideas? It doesn't, replies Chaim Laser, but this place is doomed. So yeah, for some context, Chaim Laser is the character with this grave pronouncement, and Novak is in fact Piotr Novak, who is a member of the secret police, and he is there because he's been following Fanny and her companions around. He's convinced that they're part of a massive plot to take down the government. But anyway, this whole thing feels quite different than the Sholem Aleichem sort of nostalgic goodbye to the Russian Jewish community. They will, in fact, be swallowed up and spit out by the Holocaust and the creation of the USSR. But in a way, Itzkovitz is positing that this could be a good thing, that the Jews, in fact, are stagnant here. And the Russian Empire, too, is stagnant in its final decades, which adds to Piotr Novak's, paranoia and his belief that the Fanny and her companions and Zvi Meyer are part of a Zionist or socialist anti-Russian plot or what have you. But in fact, none of these characters' goals are political. Zvi Meyer is a self-proclaimed prophet and a bit of a blowhard, and he abandoned his family for selfish and never-ending reasons, so that makes him a lot less sympathetic than Fanny. But is there some truth to what he says? He was kicked out of his yeshiva, or aka religious study institution, for going on a tear about the nature of good versus evil in the creation story. This is what he writes in a letter to his teachers from where he ends up in Minsk. Had he not violated the prohibition, man could not have known what is either good or evil. He could only obey. The tree from which Adam and Eve took the forbidden fruit became the tree of knowledge of good and evil only once they transgressed, not a moment earlier. Beloved teachers, I cannot describe to you the feelings that overtook me. I collapsed as soon as I let go of my perturbations. I lay on the ground, stupefied, the happiest man alive, spirit without flesh. The Holy Scripture suddenly made perfect sense. Innumerable quandaries were instantly resolved. I kept thinking what else we might learn from this discovery. Only once man violated the divine decree, he could see that there is faith and unfaith, at which point he could choose for the first time between devoutness and heresy. Violation of divine decree is therefore a necessary condition of faith. This is the naked truth. Maybe this is a warning about taking nihilism, like nothing really matters, too far. Maybe Zvi Meyer is really nothing more than a fool. But I can't help wondering, in this story that transcends all sorts of convention, if there's something to be said about the fact of fresh debate and even Yetzer Hara, or the inclination to do evil, over nostalgic stagnation. My nonfiction pick, Beyond the Synagogue, Jewish Nostalgia as Religious Practice by Rachel B. Gross, kind of chronicles the next step in this specific sort of Ashkenazi Jewish journey. At least for characters like Chaim Laser from the fiction one, who decided to leave the Pale of Settlement for New York. Many Russian Jews settled in New York and broader America in the late 19th to early 20th centuries. They set up institutions to practice Judaism, but a lot of those institutions were ultimately abandoned due to old age and assimilation of the community into broader norms. Fast forward to the 21st century, And many of these non-religious Jews who do not follow halacha much or at all, are using nostalgia to connect to the faith. Gross lays out several examples of this, from visiting refurbished synagogues, dipping into genealogy, buying their children ethnic books and toys, and eating Ashkenazi foods. Gross, in fact, calls these activities religious practice. In this book, I use the term nostalgia as a way to engage and complicate conversations about Jewish memory, history, and heritage, popular accounts of the past that give it meaning in the present. Acclaimed Jewish historian Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi identifies Jewish memory and Jewish history as radically different relations to the past. Memory is the dynamic product of community, he says, while history is the product of scholars. Yerushalmi worries that a detached Jewish history has overtaken Jewish memory. Later theorists recognize a more complex relationship between history and memory, drawing attention to the ways that Jews and other peoples use each in the service of the other. For individuals and organizations, I argue, nostalgia bridges historical scholarship and social memory. It is both an individual feeling and a shared practice. So I have to backtrack a little on what I said before, because obviously, according to Gross, nostalgia is not always a bad thing. It can, in fact, bridge the present to the past and sort of bridge these ideas of history and memory together. But it does get more complicated than that with what's going on now, too. Take, for example, a late 1990s museum exhibition at the Eldridge Synagogue. A temple first opened in 1887 on the Lower East Side of New York City. The installation was called Welcome to America, and it was installed, to go back to the movie, in the women's balcony. It took wedding gowns and made them into these ghostly sort of dresses. So the artist, Carol Hamoy, tinted and stained the white garments and imprinted them in gold text with a quote from the woman or a brief poignant description of a moment from her life. For Rose, whose baby had measles on the boat to America, Hamoy wrote, "She kept him wrapped in a pink blanket to offset his face, allowing him to pass through the immigration inspections with an undetected illness." Another dress identified Haye Soret as a design prodigy from Pinsk. Hanging from the ceiling and swaying in the breeze, the ghostly dress materialized the absent immigrant founding congregants. Visitors' movements through the maze of dresses and memories physically reinforced the connection between the past and the present. Reviewers saw spiritual meaning in the synagogue installation. A review in FemSpec, an interdisciplinary feminist journal, explained that the installation invites the spirits who once frequented the synagogue to revisit their ancient abode. Their presence among us reminds us that our foremothers are ever present in our midst, especially when we pray. Regardless of whether they were biologically connected to the women represented, visitors felt the guiding presence of their ancestors in this space. This was followed by a similar exhibition by the artist Hannah Iverson, who described herself as a truly secular Jew, which was installed on the stairs leading up to the women's balcony. But this focus on women and feminism, Gross argues, is transformative. It's not about just honoring the past, it's about bringing new things into the present. She writes, "By eliciting longing for particular Jewish pasts and reevaluating them through a contemporary feminist approach, Hamoy's and Iverson's exhibits demonstrated that the preservationist effect of the Eldridge Street Project was itself the work of a living religious space. In fact, for visitors who felt alienated by the patriarchal Jewish traditions, these feminist exhibits could make the space more religiously meaningful than it had been when it only housed an Orthodox congregation." Hamoy's and Iverson's exhibits connected visitors to an elegiac nostalgia for the past that was both more broadly and more personally meaningful than the synagogue's history would have been on its own. Another thing that is broadened in Jewish experience, I would argue, is how assimilation and a sort of universality is now part of the mix. For example, in how this book deals with Kitlit. In 2009, the Mattel-owned American Girl Company introduced its first historical Jewish character, Rebecca Rubin, a Russian immigrant who lived on the Lower East Side in 1914. I have her books right over here. Jewish-American middle grade author Jacqueline Dembar Green was commissioned to write her story, first through the traditional American Girl model of 6 books chronicling specific themes, and then through more literature. So we're already fitting Rebecca's narrative into a pre-existing framework for these other non-Jewish dolls. It blends Jewish specificity with American universalism. Gross writes, Green's story ultimately advances a multicultural agenda as a moral good, presenting tolerance and respect as Judaism's ultimate religious values, as well as generic American values. Rebecca's Hanukkah adventure, conflating different periods in American history with a multicultural girl's eye view, encourages readers to use the scriptive book and doll combination to place themselves within what has become a timeless story. Longing for the Eastern European immigrant past is both a religious activity for American Jews and a means of expressing tolerance that is available to all consumers. Readers accustomed to this didactic style of American Girl products are primed to interpret the present-day lessons in the Rebecca stories. But despite these broader lessons, Rebecca is still visibly Jewish. She is the stereotypical American Jewish immigrant. She's Ashkenazi, she arrives in the early 20th century, she lives on the Lower East Side. Dembar herself comes from a Sephardi family, a very different sort of Jewish-American origin story. But the specific Ashkenazi one remains primal in sort of a Jewish-American memory. To be fair, it encompasses a lot of the Jewish-American communal past, including the history of my own family, so... It's also true that some of these forms of nostalgia and how they evolve in the present day might force us to confront viewpoints that are too narrow, specifically when it comes to genealogy, which Gross revisits in her conclusion. On the one hand, an overriding focus on Ashkenazi Jewish genes in home testing reinforces the idea that Ashkenazi heritage is Jewish heritage and bolsters a focus on nostalgia for Eastern European pasts. On the other hand, as those who identify as Jews find a range of non-Ashkenazi genetic markers, and those who do not identify as Jews are told they have Jewish genes, conversations about Jewish heritage may widen. For now, many Americans who do not identify as Jews but learn of Jewish ancestry through DNA testing are quickly pulled into conversations about American Jewish nostalgia for Ashkenazi heritage. So yeah, it's narrow because it only focuses on Ashkenazi heritage and not Jewish heritage from other places outside of Eastern Europe. But it's also arguably broad because we are forced to confront that the community did not remain fully intact and that in fact there are people alive today whose ancestors might have been part of the Jewish community and they themselves are no longer, but if genealogy and genetics are a part of heritage, then they arguably have some part of a seat at the table. I know from personal experience a lot of my non-Jewish friends who took DNA tests and posted them or talked about them with me, talked about some limited Ashkenazi heritage in their genes. And I've been holding on to my own DNA test from Ancestry.com and not taking it. Perhaps because I'm too wrapped up in what could be, I would argue, a false narrative about if it can strip away Jewish identity. I come from an interfaith family, although my non-Jewish dad is one of those people who took a DNA test and found some scant Ashkenazi heritage in his roots. My mother's family, as I've referenced, came from the Pale of Settlement spanning from the late 1880s to the early 1900s. Most Jews were escaping direct or indirect persecution in the Russian Empire. If I do not fit fully into a pre-existing Jewish narrative, then am I truly a Jew? Suddenly, this video and this Maybe Midrash reading project is telling me yes. Nostalgia, or maybe more accurately to what I've been saying, a rigid definition of stricture, can only take us so far. Then we must widen horizons in order to face the future. And that about covers it for me now. I will leave a link to the trailer for the Women's Balcony movie down below, as well as links to my Goodreads reviews for the 2 books I've been yammering on about. Feeling pretty good about how this whole wrap-up came together. Hope I keep my good mood and optimism as I move into the post-production phase. But yeah, thank you again for Jason, to Jason, for another great year of the Maybe Midrash Readathon. I hope everyone who participated read good and thoughtful and challenging books and read and watched similar movies. I will be back on this channel within the next few days to do my final, I believe, am reading update for the month, to talk about what I'm reading currently rather than back in May. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.